The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm your host, Father Nathan Castle, assisted today by my beloved canine assistant, Toto. We are going to be sharing with you a story that's in the newest book in the Afterlife Interrupted series, Afterlife Interrupted Book 3. Can you see it? It's awkward, but Please Let Me Explain is the subtitle. So in this book, we chose stories from the ministry that my prayer partners and I have that you might be familiar with souls who died suddenly and violently most of the time, traumatized in their passing and needing some afterlife calming time and healing time before they're ready to go on for other afterlife adventures. And for us, we mostly are just helping them get out the door of like a medical center. It seems like they've healed to the point where they don't need to stay there any longer, and they are ready for fun times. So in today's story, it's unusual in that when these people bring me a dream, normally there's a narrative like a little film. You know how dreams are. They very often have some sort of plot line and scenery and things going on in them. This time it was just one word. It had the impact of a contact. It woke me up. It made me think I was just contacted. But all I heard was this. Hello. That's a funny sound, isn't it? Hello. Um, it sounded like a male voice, although it sounded kind of mechanical and flat in its affect. Hello is a way to get someone's attention, and it did get my attention. I woke up from it, and I just wrote it down on the odd chance that it was a contact because it felt like it. So you might know that I keep a journal on the nightstand for occasions when people visit, as they do about once a week on average. And then we take them in turn. I sometimes have between 5 and 10 of them waiting for us to get around to the prayer session. Fortunately, we don't keep them waiting much more than a few weeks, if that. But I did write it down. We had a scheduled time together with a couple of my prayer partners, and uh, this was Kim and Karen, both of whom are in therapeutic counseling occupations, ministries, and who were doing this one together. What I'm going to do is tell you this story in this episode, and then our custom is to follow it up with a next episode the next week that we call Compassionate Response. When people have heard this story, learned of it, and have written to me or told me about what it evoked in them, oftentimes there's enough material in there to make a show. And then I like to then come back and do a third part of a trilogy where we just call it spiritual practice. That something about this story brings up in me something that I might suggest to listeners and viewers that might be a spiritual practice that they take on if this story has some pertinence to their own lives. So today we're doing a story from book 3 that happens to be the 10th chapter, and it's named Not So Simple Simon, the Savant, Angel Shalom, and Mother Maylene. When I tell these stories in a podcast, I'm giving you a digest of what's a longer story in the telling in writing. So if you find it interesting, I encourage you to get a copy of the book. But for now, I can tell you that there we were, and when we went into protective prayer, which is always what we do. I like to say to people that um, I believe everyone that God ever made is made in the image of God and his goodness. but not everyone is well behaved and has our best interest at heart. I don't pick up hitchhikers on this plane or any other spiritual plane. I first make sure that we're kept safe by going to St. Michael the Archangel, asking his protection, invoking the active presence of my own guardian angel and the guardians of the prayer partners I'm working with, normally on a Zoom call that day. I'd like to call on Holy Mary, Mother of Jesus, and her spouse Joseph, Saint Dominic, the patron of the order I belong to, the Dominicans, Saint Francis, Saint Rose, Saint Mary Magdalene. There are a lot of them that I call on a fairly regular basis. Saint Paul. Anyway, I feel like we're making a holy huddle around ourselves, or maybe something more like an orb, a bubble, being inside uh, a protected place where we then open ourselves to uh, uh, spirit communication, which I just call prayer. Well, anyway, yeah, and this story, all we got was this one word. Hello. You like that, huh? Hello. Um, and we often ask for the guardian of the person who's bringing the story to give us a little clarity. And very often the guardians will take a name for that day, not their given name. And they've told us that they don't really use language with each other because they don't need to. They can convey, communicate anything they need to by looking at one another. And they don't use words in a human language, but they know that we do. And so this guardian came up with the name Shalom, which in Hebrew means hello. So isn't that clever? They also, I think that it gets used twice to say goodbye. Toto says he's got dog things to do, so I'm going to be on my own for the rest of this. Anyway, the angel Shalom uh, came to tell us, yes, indeed, that this person, um, this was a contact and it was the person he guarded. He also let us know that the young person in this story was male. I had guessed that right, was in his early 20s, and since birth had had the issue of being on the autism spectrum. Because of that, he was hit. Well, his father left them, just didn't couldn't imagine a life of raising an autistic son, and left Simon was his name, and his mother. So they had named him Simon, and when he was a child in elementary school, he was teased by being called Simple Simon. Maybe older people in this audience will remember a nursery rhyme that had to do with Simple Simon met a pieman going to the fair. Some simpleton uh, person named Simon. Well, it was a synonym for stupid or slow, something like that. And Simon knew in childhood that he was being insulted. Um, and he knew that people thought he looked stupid because he processed things differently, the way folk on the spectrum often do. And in his experience, he gained language and could speak and communicate in speech, but he didn't get what he called subtlety. He needed everything to be literal. So he didn't like jokes at all because they often turn on some sort of linguistic irony or something, uh, jokes and laughter that follow them. He just didn't understand them. So he tried to avoid circumstances where he would be around joke telling in any speech that wasn't literal. He particularly didn't like English classes in school. He said they would ask you something like, when this character did that, what were they really thinking? When they said that, what were they really saying? And that just went right over his head. So he didn't like that kind of subtlety either. But he excelled in math and sciences where there was a lot of discrete data, where you didn't need to deal with subtleties to be able to do mathematics, or a lot of the sciences that relied heavily on mathematics, physics, and chemistry, for example. So it turned out that he was able to, his mother was very dedicated, very loving. Her name is Maylene. She showed up. he explained to us when he got started talking that his mother gave him lots of experiences outside of school where he could learn things on his own the way he liked to learn them. He said, we did very little that didn't have to do with learning something because I so enjoyed learning things. And she knew my learning style, so she'd take me to places where I could move at my own pace, where I didn't have to be in a group, where I wouldn't be teased or taunted. Um, Apparently she liked to take him to museums, and he would like to stand in front of a thing for much longer than most people would in a museum or perhaps a zoo. He liked zoos, but he wanted to stand and keep stay with this one animal until he felt like he understood it. And then he would say, it's time to move. So his mother was very patient with that. Anyway, he explained that he had been so well loved throughout his somewhat difficult childhood and got all the way through college. His mother even moved to be near his college so she could take care of some of the things of his daily life, cooking, cleaning, uh, just to make it easier for him to apply himself to his studies without having to uh, take care of a lot of other things. So, but it happened that just as he was graduating college, she developed cancer, and it turned out to be fatal. Well, so he was only in his early 20s when the person who had loved him so consistently and heroically, really, died. Well, by that time, he had gotten a job in a research lab associated with the university that he had graduated from. And he was very good at a lot of research things because data points, uh, explorations, experiments that dealt with math and science data, he was really good at. Well, he explained to us, I was talking with him, and I try to get still, and sometimes we need to make a better connection. It's not that different from conversations you might have been in that might have been casually pleasant for a while, one on one, until the conversation somehow deepened or entered into territory that might be difficult to talk about or more intimate, and where you might need to change the tone and make it understood that we're connecting at a deeper level now. Well, that happens in these conversations, and we did that. And when we did, I felt like electricity. I felt a shock. And I thought, I wonder if this person was electrocuted. And it turned out that as he told us his story, he was working with a research team on exoskeletons, human exoskeletons. Are you familiar with that? You know, you and I have an endoskeleton, a spine that runs right up our back, and all the bones attached to it that are inside of us. But some life forms have a skeleton that's on the outside of the body. And uh, he was involved in research to see if researchers could come up with wearable skeletons for humans who had had spinal cord injuries and were no longer able to walk or uh, use limbs or whatever. And so uh, they're trying to look at how, even for me to raise my hand, I have to have the thought in my brain, I want to raise my hand, and then a bunch of electrical impulses have to move from my brain down my arms, and my muscles have to respond, and I can do something like wave at you. Well, for some people, there's been an interruption in that energy flow because of oftentimes a trauma to the body. Something's been cut off, and now they can't do something as simple as that. Well, he explained that he preferred to be alone, and on the day that he accidentally died, he was alone in the lab. They were working on how electricity moves through the body, the electric impulses that animate us, that make it possible for us to move. And he was calibrating different amounts of electricity that could be uh, added to the body to affect different kinds of muscular responses. Well, you see where this is heading? He accidentally gave himself a shock that it was too much electricity and it stopped his heart. There was no one there to revive him, and so he died on the floor of the lab. Although, to hear him talk about it, he just thought it was sort of an oops. He said, I just put too much, that's all. He wasn't upset or kicking himself. And then he said, it would be really hard to kick yourself. You could take one foot and kick the other foot, maybe. Maybe you could make your foot kick your hand, but you couldn't really make your foot kick your back or your stomach. So he was even kind of he was using that language, that he said it wouldn't make literal sense. But once we at least knew that issue, that was how he died, we our next response was to say, well, how can we help you? What would you like us to do? And we know that the ones that come in our line are really at a kind of graduation day, and his guardian Shalom had explained to us that he's ready to make a move, and uh, this will be sort of a graduation day. And he had been through graduations before, so they were preparing him that he was moving from one level to the next, but that the next level would be even more fun and have more freedoms. And the movements from graduating from, I don't know, kindergarten, uh, the junior high, high school, college, that each time more possibilities opened up as you gained more wisdom and skill and aptitude. So he understood that he was going to be doing some sort of graduation with us, but they gave us the information that in the afterlife, he kept wanting more and more math and science. The afterlife has a physics. It's different from the physics of this body and these surroundings, but it still has a kind of physics. And he wanted to understand what it was. So he wanted more math and science that could help him comprehend it. And they said to him, his helper team in the afterlife said, well, uh, we understand that you would like more math and science because you were so accustomed to it. But the reason you were accustomed to it when you were in a human body that was on the autism spectrum is because that way of being made it so difficult for you to understand things that were not all about math and science. For example, you and I might enjoy a piece of music. We might enjoy its melodies and rhythms, the emotions that it might evoke, or the story it might tell. If it's a ballad, for example, Simon would listen to music, but he was always thinking about the mathematics of it, the chord structure, you know, 1, 3, 5, or the octave scale and so on. He would listen to music, but he was always picking apart scientifically for that kind of thing. He also said, I would look at the ocean. If I were standing next to you, you might see its beauty and the way the sun sparkles off the tops of the tips of the little waves. I would be thinking about its salinity and wondering how salty it was. Or when a wave would form, I would be wondering what the topography of the ocean floor was in that area that caused the wave to form itself that way. So they said to him, well, you can enjoy music now, or you can enjoy literature, you can enjoy looking at an ocean in a way that you couldn't have before. And we would like you to develop some of this before you indulge your appetite for more and more math and science. They weren't forbidding him. They were just saying to him, you got so used to doing only what your limited body and consciousness would permit. We want you to broaden out. And then if you do a little bit of that, then we'd be perfectly okay with you doing more math and science. Well, he wasn't bossed around, but he agreed that that sounded wise. So he began to explore or ask, how can I do that? How can I learn about subtleties? Well, this one is just crazy. I'm going to pause for just a minute to tell you a story about a piece of the universe I would have never known that existed unless I was introduced to it. My sister Catherine, who is the editor of my books and great friend of mine, in addition to being a sibling, is a scuba diver, and she's taken me diving a number of times. And you don't have to go around a colorful coral reef or find some extraordinary undersea uh, things necessarily. She showed me how you can go into what looks like pretty plain terrain in shallow water. And she, because you're wearing scuba gear, you can't talk, but you can gesture. So I remember one time gesturing, and she pointed at a very specific piece of the ocean floor. On it, there was a little shrimp that lived in a little hole that it dug in the sand, and it would come up and it would pop its head out, and then it would go back down. Well, she said and it was almost transparent. It was white and but almost transparent. And she said, that's a blind shrimp. It has no sight. Because of that, it can be vulnerable to predators because it can't see them. But she said, look over here. This this blind shrimp has next to it a little thing that looks like a minnow. It's a little tiny fish, but instead of a fish being, parallel to the ground, the way that you're used to thinking of a fish swimming through water, it's as though it were standing on its tail next to this hole that the shrimp lives in. And he said, that little fish guards the shrimp to keep it safe. Anywhere you see one of these little fish that looks like it's standing up like a sentinel, it's protecting the shrimp. Well, who would have thought there was such a thing? And the more that you spend time in unusual environments like the ocean, maybe extraordinary climates like around volcanic undersea stuff, there's a lot of odd wildlife, probably in the Arctic or maybe uh, deserts or jungles. You'll find all kind of things that you didn't know existed that are really quite wild. Well, I'm going into that because I'm about to tell you about something that's really quite wild. I remember being taught in first grade that God has created a universe with astounding variety in it, uh, and that God has created heaven for us to dwell in after we're done here on the earth, and that heaven would have everything we needed to be completely happy, and it wouldn't be generic. That God knows that we're all different from one another, and God is, in the Christian schema, we start with the name of the Father. That God is thought of as parent who knows his children and knows how different they can be from one another, and then tries to delight them. So they would have exactly what they needed to be completely happy. Well, here comes what Simon needed. When he said yes to, okay, I'll go ahead and try to learn about subtleties, one of the things he revealed was that he never liked going to restaurants, because restaurants are places where people eat food. That literally is what restaurants exist for. He said, but the thing was, when you go to a restaurant with a group of people, they're not just eating food. They're doing a lot of other subtleties that he didn't understand. And they would either praise the restaurant or complain about the restaurant, rank it according to all kind of subtleties. So he felt left out, even though he might have been there at the table. He felt like the conversations flew past him. He felt uncomfortable, and he preferred just to go someplace where he could eat food and not have people doing all these subtleties they do at restaurants. Well, when it came time, as the conversation evolved, we said, well, tell us, how did you learn about some subtleties? And he said, well, my mother came. We learned that her name is Maylene. She's, of course, in the afterlife. She had died before he did. And she decided to continue to work with him the way that she always had, and help him learn things. Except now he was doing it without the impairment, if you want to call it that, of his being on the autism spectrum. He didn't have that issue any longer. So this is the crazy part. Restaurants. Simon struggled to tell us he couldn't find the word simulator, but he said something like this, and it's all in the chapter. He said, you know, those machines that people can go inside of that are not really an airplane, but they're a practice airplane. And I think my prayer partner said simulator. I said, yeah, simulator. Well, they don't just have them for airplanes. Did you know that here they have them for restaurants? There's a place where you can go where you can learn about how to go to a restaurant and enjoy it. It's a practice, not a real restaurant. Well, isn't that crazy? Crazy funny, crazy creative. But he said, here's what you do. My mom went with me, and you go to the front door of it, and there are some settings, and you can put it maybe on poor. And if you put it on poor, as soon as you walk in, the restaurant starts having bad things. You walk in, and the person that greets you at the door says, we can't find your name on the list. We don't see a reservation. You'll have to sit over there. We'll call you when a table becomes available. So they don't know your name. Then when they find a table for you, it's next to the bathroom door or a bunch of clatter. He said maybe they seat you in a place where the air conditioning duct is right over your head and blowing on you. Um, Maybe the person that takes your order gets it wrong. They bring you your food and it's too little for what you paid for it, or it's cold or burned or something. Um, he said sometimes they would refill your water glass so many times it was annoying, or they take your food before you were finished eating it. Anyway, he came up with a long list of all the behaviors that he could see why this was not a good thing. So it wasn't so subtle anymore because he could experience it and remember it. Then he said, when you're finished and you leave the restaurant, if you want to, you can go right back to the little controls and you can put it on good or on excellent. And then everything begins to change right away. They were happy to greet you. They knew you by name. They sat you at the table by the window where you could look at the ocean. Um, they had a pleasant server that explained things that were not on the menu, today's specials. The food arrived hot and plentiful. The service was good and not hovering. The environment was pleasant. And the whole thing was a good experience. Well, he had had all these experiences that weren't just about the food and just about eating it. He had all these other experiences that he used to think of as subtle, but now he could understand them. So he said, there are a lot of other things that I want to learn about. And I guess there must be other kinds of simulators or other ways that they help people that don't know about them to learn about them. And so I'm doing some of that now. And they are letting me go back to the research that I enjoyed. And he said, I want to see if I can get back into the labs in spirit form and whether I can whisper in anybody's ear or whether I can watch the flow of the experimentation that he had devoted himself to and see if from his afterlife way of being, he could influence it for the good. So uh, that is the crazy story, the basic story of Not So Simple Simon. In subsequent episodes next week, we'll deal with that story, but we'll go into compassionate response and then in a third part of the trilogy into a spiritual practice that's based upon this story. So with that, that's it for right now. I'm your host, Father Nathan Castle. If there's something I can do for you, you can contact me through my website, nathan-castle.com. Please just don't ask me questions that you could have learned by reading the story, because I would love for you to answer your questions, but I do ask that you've read one of the stories that you're asking about. In any event, I'm praying for you, and I wish you joy. God bless you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.